I am really now interested in just the series of prayers prayed by the men of God, and maybe there's even a woman. I don't know if Deborah prayed something or something like this similar, but like that have like intervened and caused God to like relent or to change his mind or things, right? Like we see time and time again that oftentimes these prophets of the Lord will, as you said, lead or intercede. And I think it'd be really interesting to see those compiled somewhere and just see all the times in which prayer changed God's mind in some way, right? Yo, welcome back to the Vibes Daily podcast. It is day 270 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted, as we journey through the entire Bible from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation. You have joined us here in the book of Amos, and I am back and joined by my wife, Victoria, as we finish out this brief book here that we started on yesterday with a few chapters and also with the book of Joel that we did yesterday. But we pick up here in chapter 5 as we continue to hear from this sheep breeder who is prophesying on behalf of the Lord, who God has chosen in this season. And so pick up at chapter 5, and you talked a little bit yesterday about just kind of some of the poetic nature of Amos in some ways. And I think chapter 5 definitely reflects that in this lament as he just kind of cries out on behalf of Israel. What jumps out to you in this first chapter here that we'll get to today, which is chapter 5?
Yeah, the first thing that jumped out to me was just how in the past, and as we've been reading, there has often been this like pronouncement of the Lord where he's like, here's your judgment, but don't worry, Judah, I will restore you and I will bring you back and I will bless you, and your children will multiply and all of the blessings. Here in Amos chapter 5, verse 5, it says like, don't seek Bethel or go to Gilgal or journey to Beersheba, for Gilgal will certainly go into exile and Bethel will come to nothing. And to me, it was kind of like, oh wait, what happened? Like, will there be a restoration here at Bethel, at all? Like he mentioned about Gilgal, and it seems like maybe he'll come to nothing, maybe he will restore it at some point, but like right here in this, it just seems like that's it. Like, and there might not be the restoration of that. So that stuck out to me. And I felt like we heard a story. We heard somebody's story that said, don't go.
That's all I could think of.
That's all I could think about, right? It was just like they had a story. Somebody sat down with them and was just like, don't go to Bethel. I don't know what that means.
His House, His Presence. From that book we read.
His Presence.
The pastor of that book, that wrote that book, Michael Miller. I can't remember the guy's name right now. But yeah, he said they were actually preparing to go to a church called Bethel, or a college called Bethel, Bethel College or something of that nature is where they were planning to go. Like you said, some ladies a couple had invited them to dinner, sat them down, and the lady just looked them straight in the face and said, it didn't know about the college or anything of that nature, but just was like, God told me to read to you Amos 5:5.
Yes. And she was like, I don't even know if this means anything to you at all.
Yeah.
Like it might.
And it was just so perfect. So yeah, that's all I could think about was that story. And just because as I read it, I would have never thought anything of that.
Until I heard their story.
Yeah. And how specific it was for them.
Interesting, because it said Amos is a prophet. And so this lady came and gave a prophetic word. And who knows what her occupation was. Who knows what, where she came from in life. But I feel like that is like the Lord can use anyone to bring something as like that was life transforming for them. I'm sure.
Yeah. But I think like even verse 6 I thought was really interesting, because it's like, seek the Lord and live, right? Or he will spread like fire throughout the house of Joseph, will consume everything with no one at Bethel to extinguish it. And I just think like if I were, even to kind of go after verse 5 to go into that verse, I love, we've talked about all the way back since Deuteronomy, I believe, how in Joshua, how God's call was always like, choose life, right? Like, choose life. And we hear that call over and over again in scripture. And so just to see that, like, repeated, seek the Lord and live, because ultimately to not seek him is to choose death, right? And so I thought that was interesting. But yeah, anything else jump out to you here in chapter 5?
Yeah. Yeah, I think once again, just in verse 12, it's just like, for I know your crimes are many and your sins innumerable. Once again, they oppress the righteous, take a bribe, they deprive the poor of justice at the city gates. And so once again, as we were mentioning yesterday, one of the big things that the Lord had against Israel is just the way they treated the poor. Yeah. And we see that again here. Yeah. Yeah. And then 18. Are you gonna get to 18?
Well, I was actually gonna start at 14 and 15, but just because on that same piece, that to continue to expand on that idea, just justice, right? Pursue good and not evil, so that you may live. Like, I just thought that parallel. I think one of the things I love to watch the Bible Project videos for some of these. I think they give great perspective. And one of the things they kind of pointed out was that that seeking the Lord led to life, but also pursuing good led to life, right? And how essentially it's the same thing, that seeking the Lord is pursuing good, that kind of thing, that because he is good. And so just seeing that parallel between verse 14 and verse 16, I thought was really, really interesting. But yeah, talk to me about 18.
18 starts something that I thought was really interesting. But I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to use that tomorrow when I talk to the kids, because tomorrow we're working on the fruits of the Spirit. Goodness is one of them, and I was trying to explain goodness to Blake tonight. I'm stealing that. Okay, kids, go at Amos 5. Anyways, so verse 18 though here starts this like ripple of things that just caught my attention, just stuck with me. But once again, it was like we mentioned yesterday, like it just seems like thing after thing after thing is going wrong, right, with the locusts and everything. Back in Joel. And so here's another example here, was just like, woe to you for who long for the day of the Lord, because what would the day of the Lord be like for you? And that's just like, just pause real quick, because sometimes we think that the day of the Lord is going to be blessings for us, or like finally the Lord's going to come, or finally, the Lord knows my heart, but when he really does know our heart, it might not be so good for us. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's the key. The key is the day of the Lord is going to be consistent. What happens is based on you, right? You. Like, for some, the day of the Lord will be a day of freedom and blessing and redemption and restoration. For others, the day of the Lord will be judgment and destruction. Will be judgment either way, but it will be either destruction for some or freedom for others, right? So to your point, yes, the day of the Lord is the day either way, and it's going to be a day of judgment. Which side you're on, and how you receive that is up to you, which is ultimately what Amos is saying, is that for you guys, this is what the day of the Lord will be.
It's going to look like a ripple effect of just horror after horror after horror. Like, it will be darkness and it will not be light, right? Yeah. Like, it'll be like a man who flees from a lion only to have a bear confront him. Yeah. He goes home and rests his hands against the wall only to have a snake bite him. Yep. Won't the day of the Lord be darkness rather than light? Even gloom without any brightness in it? And I'm just like, that sucks. Yeah. Like, that sucks. We was like thing after thing after thing. Like, you will not be able to escape the wrath of the Lord. And that's what shows me. I mean, we'll be going into Jonah soon, but like, who thought he could escape the Lord, right? And then the Lord is like, I will follow you wherever you go and make sure that I bring justice to you. And but then he goes on. He's just like, even if you offer me your burnt offerings and your grains, like, I will not accept them. Like, at this point, it's too late. Yeah. I will have no regard for your fellowship offerings of fattened calf. Take away the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Like, it's like, he's just like, they're burning my ears. Yeah. Like, because your heart it has not changed. He said, but let justice, like you said, flow like water, and righteousness like an unfailing stream. And so, like, he is a just God. So if he does not do anything to them at this point, he's not a just God. And so,
yeah. Well, I was going to point out because, and I think that whole section is good. We've talked about that before, just that like empty worship to God, and just again how I think just to me saddened that would make me to know that like all my worship, God's just like,
yeah,
disgusting. I don't want that.
Because he said to us, like, you don't even have to sing well. Like, just make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And if he really was in there looking at me like, this sounds terrible, I don't want to hear it. Not because of my voice, but because of my heart.
Yeah, that would hurt. But
yeah,
I was gonna say, I think one of the things you called out, as far as just not being able to escape, that's also like related to the vision he gives in 9, because when we get to 9, he actually says, verse 2, if they dig down, well, end of verse 1, none of those who flee will get away, none of the fugitives will escape. If they dig down the Sheol, from there my hand will take them. If they climb up to heaven, from there I will bring them down. This is chapter 9, by the way, just to be clear, not verse 9. And if they hide on the top of Carmel. So like he even goes on at 9 when he gets this vision of them beside the altar, which is very similar to kind of where we are here, which is this altar and sacrifice, that even in his visions that Amos gets, it again brings up this idea you can't get away from it. You can't. Right? Like you can't go. And it reminds me a little bit of that's Psalm 139, I believe, is your favorite psalm, right? Where it's just like, if I go to the heavens, you are there. And if I go,
make my bed in Sheol,
right? But he's just like, same concept. It's just as much as I can be present with you in those places, you can't hide from me in those places either. Even if you try, when it comes to judgment, I will go find you and get you in that. So I thought that theme was consistent throughout. But let's get to 6, because in 6 he kind of deals with those who are secure, who find their security, in Samaria and whatnot. But what you find was interesting in chapter 6? What jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, these people are just living, right? Like some of these nations that we haven't even heard about what their kingdom looked like, right? Or like how they lived. And, we get an idea of the Israelites' kings, or even just more so Judah's kings, and what their palaces and stuff look like. But here it's just like go down the gap to the Philistines, right? Like their beds is inlaid with the ivory. Like they are living. They got songs that they improvise, and they invent their own musical instruments like David. Like they are doing it. They drink wine by the bowlful. Like these people are chilling. But like watch out. Like don't be complacent, because they're about to go into exile too. Like you guys can chill if you want to, but and so he starts with nations like that who are just complacent, or people who are complacent, and then ultimately goes back to Israel and Israel's pride, and still trying to tell Israel to turn back. But but just saying on that day that, like you said, like y'all gonna be so scattered. And it's going to be dead people everywhere. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And you'll be hiding in your house.
Yeah, I think definitely what jumped out to me was kind of what you referred to there, was just the pride again. This is a constant theme in scripture. And so that he loathes Jacob's pride, right? In verse 8, he hates it, which we even know back from Proverbs was something that, God hates specifically. But then also, again, this emphasis on justice and righteousness in verse 12. So it says, yet you have turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. Like how they have just corrupted what is just and what is right. And essentially just spat it out and just like turned it again, like on its head and perverted it. I just think it's so interesting. And again, that's what seems to matter to God in this season. He calls Amos specifically to just say, Israel, you guys have missed the mark on being just and being right to the people, specifically. But anything else there that was in 6? Okay. The 7 starts a section that's very unique, kind of to the rest of the book. It's these visions that Amos gets. So Amos gets a few different visions. We get a quick narrative here in 7 as well, that we can touch on. But 7, 8, and 9, we kind of have these visions that God gives Amos. So a quick summary: we have one on locusts, one on fire. We have a plumb line. We have a summer fruit basket, essentially. We have the Lord besides the altar, and that's in 9 before we kind of end on something else. But talk to me about the visions as a whole. Anything jump out to you from these visions?
How many times the Lord relented? Like he would show Amos this vision, and then Amos would be like, "Oh Lord, like please forgive us," right? Like how will Jacob survive when he's so small? Like, oh Lord, how will Jacob survive? And each time, at least in verse 3, after the vision of the locust, and then after the vision of the fire, it says the Lord relented concerning this. This will not happen either, said the Lord. And it was kind of like, like, is the Lord just, showing him just to show him? But I feel like that is the Lord that we have, is that prophets have prayed on behalf of the people and the Lord has relented, right? But then it comes to a point where he's just like, no, I'm finna do this. Like, this one I'm going to do. And is it the plumb line? I think it's the plumb line one, right? Where he's like, I will no longer spell them. This is verse 8. Mm-hmm. And so he says he will no longer spare them at this point, but there will be a sword that's going to rise up against them. And so those were the first things that jumped out to me. The things he said he would not do, and then the thing that he was just like, okay, no, I'm going to do this one now.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the big takeaway. And like, I think one is I'm reflecting on is, and I wonder, this probably already exists out there, but if not, maybe the Lord will have us compile something. But like, I am really now interested in just the series of prayers prayed by the men of God, and maybe there's even a woman. I don't know if Deborah prayed something or something like this similar, but like that have like intervened and caused God to like relent or to change his mind or things, right? Like Moses obviously did this at one point, right? Moses prayed, or go back to Abraham, right? God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
And Abraham's like, well, what if there's this many people? Like, would you? And he's like, okay, I won't do it for that. To ultimately be able to save Lot and his family is what came out of that. Moses, when God is upset at them for this golden calf, Moses is like, no, don't destroy them for your sake and for your name, right? Like we see that Hezekiah, who was supposed to die, prays and gets forgiveness and ultimately gets 15 extra years of life. And I think we just had this conversation with one of these recent prophets, but like we see time and time again that oftentimes these prophets of the Lord will, as you said, lead or intercede. And I think it'd be really interesting to see those compiled somewhere and just see all the times in which prayer not just even changed like a circumstance or a situation, but changed God's mind in some way, right? Or just withheld, because God ultimately still brings on the judgment. He just like relents and holds back and waits, if that makes sense, right? Like that's what we kind of see, that like his word still comes to pass. Like he doesn't change his mind. Like he's going to do what he says he's going to do, but he holds off simply because of the prayers of some. And I think it interests me because I think empowers us in our prayers to say, God, like, let's hold off, a little while longer, right? In this. And so I thought that was the big takeaway, was that the Lord relented both of those times. Yeah. More so than even the destruction, because we know the destruction is coming. Yeah. I'm more interested in the fact that he held off simply because of Amos's prayer. Yeah. Yeah. But verse 10, we kind of get this quick narrative here where Amaziah is trying to accuse him, and he's trying to send Amos on to Judah. He's like, we don't want your prophecies here. Right. Go prophesy to Judah. Tell them all this stuff. We don't want to hear this. And, go make your money elsewhere.
But that's the part that got me. Can I say that, like, at this point, prophets were just prophesying for money. Like that's what this was about. And it just pains me because he was a priest, so he was scheming too, trying to buddy up an elbow with the king, because he sent word to the king on this, right? And so it was kind of like, earn your living. They were doing this for a living, which is why I used to always say, like, why would you make up this prophecy for what? But I guess that's just how they earned their living back then. And we saw this even with what's his name in the donkey?
Balaam.
Right? Like this is how he earned his wealth was the giving a blessing or a curse or a certain prophecy and then giving the wealth. But anyways, but I love Amos's answer to him. I just hijacked your response.
No. I mean, I think go ahead. What did you love about his answer?
Because he's just like, I'm not in it for the money. I'm not like y'all.
Yeah.
In other
words, I was already good. I was out here with my sheep.
Listen,
I didn't do this for prophecy.
Listen, this is not the family business.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not in it because my father was a prophet. No, this isn't the family business. I was literally minding my own business, making my own money as a herder or a breeder. And the Lord is the one who brought me here. And so he said, I took care of sycamorphics, by the way. Mm-hmm. But the Lord took me from the flock and said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. And it says something to me where the Lord is like, I cannot talk to my priests because they're not listening.
Yeah.
And I cannot talk to the current quote unquote prophets because they're false.
Yeah.
That I have to go outside of the city. Like I have to go to a herdsman who is listening for my voice, right? Who is listening to me, to send him to the people who should be hearing me and tell them about themselves.
Yeah.
That just hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely it grieves me. But it obviously tells us that God will find a willing vessel, right? To do so. And so, I just kind of want to be like Isaiah, just here I am, Lord, send me, Lord. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, because of that, there's a prophecy even just against, Amaziah and them and the rest of just like, your wife will be a prostitute in the city and your sons and daughters will fall by the sword.
That's rough.
That's cold.
That's rough.
Yeah. So I don't know that. Ooh, that's hard. But yeah, so we get our next vision in chapter 8. And again, it's this basket of summer fruit, essentially. And, he asks him what he sees. And I think, I was reading my commentary that like the summer fruit is supposed to be kind of symbolic of just like a harvest complete, right? That like it's time for harvest essentially. And so to say that like they were ripe, like the people are ripe and they're ready to be plucked at this point. But yeah, what jumped out to you here in this vision in chapter 8?
I didn't pick up on that. I didn't even read that part. That's good. But once again, when he tells them, listen up, right? You hear this in verse 4, goes back again. I keep saying this because the Lord keeps saying it, and that's how we know it's important, because he's repeating it over and over.
Yeah.
It's just like, you who do away with the poor, right? Mm-hmm. Like that is, and you have no integrity either.
Yeah, and they're greedy, right? Like they can't wait for harvest so they can sell more food. They can't wait for Sabbath to be over so they can get back to work, right? Because all they want to do is earn more, and as you said, and cheat people along the way.
That is so crazy that the Lord gave us Sabbath to rest.
Yeah.
And I'd be guilty. Let me just say this, because I try not to like do a lot of like shopping, whether it's online or not, on the Sabbath. When we're supposed to be Sabbathing on our Saturday, we rest and we sleep and we taking naps. We not cooking, I'm not cleaning. But I be itching to make an order. I really do. And I'll even fill up the cart sometime and be like, okay, tomorrow morning I'm getting these groceries delivered. Like,
it's hilarious.
And it's a problem though that I'm waiting for it. Like, and I just can't sit and enjoy my rest. Like, I just cannot sit and enjoy the rest of the Lord gave me.
Yeah, I don't know.
Greedy, because it's nothing but break and bakes and kombucha in that order.
That's hilarious.
Don't make no sense.
Yeah, I don't have that issue. I went back to work today and people were like, hey, glad to be back.
Nope.
I'm not. I love y'all and I love what I get to do for work, and I am grateful that this is the job that I have. But if I could go back to just hanging out with my family, I absolutely would. So no,
I mean,
I'm not.
I'm not complaining with that response.
I am not glad to be back. I would go back on vacation in an instance. But yeah, I did think that was interesting that he called that out again specifically. But I think one of the other things that just jumped out to me was in verse 13, which is in that day, the beautiful young women, the men also will faint from thirst. And I don't know. I just contrasted as we've just been reading these prophets. I contrasted with Isaiah, right? That those that wait on the Lord will renew their strength, and they will run and not get weary, and they will walk and not faint, right? And so, just like I see so many parallels in these prophets and like some of the same language being used. I just thought it was really interesting to see that like this is the opposite. That in this season, essentially, they will faint. You know, they will be thirsty and those kind of things, but. Yeah, we end in chapter 9. There's a vision of the Lord beside the altar. We kind of referred to this already, and essentially just like God is calling out their altars and these ones that they have set up, and he says that he's going to bring this judgment on them and that there's no way that they can get away from it. Essentially is kind of what this first part of it shows. But was there anything else in that vision that was important before we kind of get to this end of Amos?
Yeah, I mean, I want to make sure I got this right, though. It's like he's in there and he's like crashing the temple down on their heads, right? Like, is that what's happening? He says, strike the capitals of the pillars so that the thresholds shake, knock them down on the heads of all the people. Then I will kill the rest of them with the sword, and none of those who flee will get away. Yeah. So I feel like it's talking about possibly like the destroying of the temple, or
not Jerusalem's temple, but Israel.
The Israel's. Yeah. And so, I don't know. It was just real interesting that he's just like, do away with all of that. I'm knocking it down. I'm tearing it down. And anybody who is left, I'm going to get them, whether it's sword or, you mentioned this part before already, but yeah. But by the time we get to verse 8, he's talking about like his eyes are watching this sinful kingdom and that he will obliterate it from the earth. But he won't totally destroy Jacob, the house of Jacob. But I think to me it was like you said, this ripening of the harvest, like it's ready, and the things that he said was going to come to pass. And like this is a visual of how it was going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's like you said, that's what leads off 9. But I think it's interesting that 9 ends as many of these prophecies do, right? With kind of a little hope, because in verse 11 it tells us, in that day I'll restore the fallen shelter of David. I'll repair its gaps, restore its ruins, and rebuild it as the days of old, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name. This is the declaration of the Lord. He will do this. And so like he says, I'm essentially going to restore it. And I will, bring you back. But I also think it's interesting that he brings in Edom and all the other nations, right? And not just the Israelites. And then to continue back to your idea of the poor, right? And some of the needy and the people that they've been taking advantage of. It's interesting that the days are coming, this is the Lord's declaration, where the plowman will overtake the reaper. The one who treads grapes, the sower of seeds. Like that ultimately, those that are last will be first kind of concept, that those that right now you are treating improperly, right? That ultimately they'll rise up in this as well. And I just thought that was really interesting. But anything else there at the end of 9? No? Well, like I said, that's our farmer's prophecy we got here in Amos, and we got the second half of that, and love, like you said, love his willingness to just obey and to give this message to Israel specifically, and then ultimately to us, right? We get this: take care of God's people, man. Pay attention to the signs, the things that are happening in our lives that he is sending. If again, at least go before the Lord and seek him. Again, it may not be judgment and discipline, but let's not ignore him, and not pay attention at all. And at least be willing to go before him and to repent, because he may relent.
Yeah.
Right? We just don't know. So that brings us to the end of Amos. We will pick up tomorrow with Obadiah and Jonah. We'll cover both of those tomorrow. But again, appreciate you guys joining us today for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Come back and see us tomorrow. Until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the Vibes Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.